Hey, better late than never, am I right? OU defeats Temple 51-3, covers the spread, and leads the overall series now 2-1. And well, if you asked our fan base, it was not really good enough. And no, it's not because that Temple prevented the shutout. According to the SEC, we were one of the worst teams because we allowed points. Okay, whatever. No, it's because I don't think we passed the eye test. Sure, we won 51-3 again, and if you saw the headlines, you wouldn't think anything of it. Not to mention that it was against Temple. So the bar was already set low on what we actually expected to see from the play calling, from the team, from the execution, etc. As well as not really learning too much about the team based on wanting to hold back as much as possible before they face Tennessee here in about 3 weeks. They weren't going to do deep balls. It's Temple. They weren't going to run it, do more than run it. It's Temple. But at the same time, it could have easily been 37-3 if it was not for some of the defensive of the 6 turnovers the defense had. Remember, good teams win, great teams cover. There was just not a lot about to cheer for, as there was no real big explosive plays um, out of Taylor Tatum himself. Even the fumbles at times felt forced, as the vibe just kind of overall was just kind of off. To get it out of the way, though, I think where we excelled at was that Jackson Arnold did fine. He threw many beautiful footballs. Defense lived up to their expectations, and Taylor Tatum and Burks stole the show. Defense took care of business, as did what I expected a football team to do to the for the opening game of the season against one of the worst statistical FBS teams in 2024. Despite keeping it very vanilla, they forced 6 turnovers, including one scoop and score, and dictated the pace of the game. I love what we saw from several guys, such as Kendall Dolby, and really once we got past the first 2 series, the defense just kind of like settled in and became kind of lackluster due to the quality of the opponent and not needing to exert their will more than they should have after we were up 14-0. I think Taylor Tatum on the offensive side is going to be special, even if his score and his magnificent runs were against Temple's second and third string guys. Our backup quarterback, Hawkins, was also great. It looks like he has a great ability to scramble in addition to throwing, in my opinion, as well as Jackson Arnold. And hey, we finally have a kicker. I don't see how you cannot go forward without Luke at this point. I think OU finally found their field goal kicker, and we don't have to nearly be as upset as we were last year. Finally, I'm happy to say that we looked very disciplined. Very few flags were thrown, and that's something I really like to see, especially in the first game of the season. But again, I could talk highly about key players, improvements at key positions, looking at you, tight end, and Sharp, who looked very sharp, and the kicking game. But we have to address the elephant in the room. We have to talk about the offensive line because it's validating a lot of the concerns that people were saying in the offseason and just boils down to the problems we're having offensively. Third down conversions were an absolute atrocity. Sawchuk and Barnes really struggled to gain meaningful yardage. Not to mention, outside of Burks, wide receivers just could not catch the balls. I'm looking at you, Hester and Brennan. Based on a 1 game sample size, sure. Um, it's not much to go on, especially against the quality opponent we faced. But then again, I could also see, based on the field results, Jackson Arnold's going to be running for his life a whole lot this year if we don't clean up the O line. But that just circles back around to: is this really the best we can put out there, Beat and Bow, especially with the talent we have at O line and a full fall camp? Again, that has me worried with as many guys that are out, like how disappointing they looked. It's just unacceptable in general. This was the type of player development I complained about before, that I chalked that up to Wiley and said, okay, maybe we need to take a step back from the cliff and give Beat and Bow a mulligan. And well, there's also 2 injuries that the O line has, but right now though, it's hard to give benefit of the doubt. Venable said post game that they intentionally played vanilla, which, sure, to an extent, I can believe some of that. But there is some surface level problems that need to be addressed because even against Temple, You got to be able to exert your will at any point, especially again against Temple. I know we keep stressing it's Temple. It's because Temple's a bad team. They'll be lucky to get more than 2 wins this year at this point, based on what we saw last Saturday. At the end, Beatenbow, you got to pick your best guys and get them on the field. Ensure that one of them, as well, is not Spencer Brown. I don't think I need to say it because many others have said it at this point, but he's bad. You got to get your guys, though, the good guys, onto the field, get them gelled, and get them prepared for Tennessee. Because at this point, you're setting yourself up for failure, and then you're going to be circling around and answering questions weekly, such as with Spencer Brown, for example. Are you sure he should be on the field or even be fielded on a D1 team? Why aren't you picking the guys with higher ceilings despite their lack of experience at this point? Again, that's a pick your poison type of moment. But for me, I pick the guys that have a higher ceiling. To me, they have much more uh, development that is catered to them and have much more potential versus the guys who have kind of plateaued at this point. Again, it's Temple. You shouldn't have gotten worked over nearly as much as you did. It's embarrassing when O linemen are getting pancaked. And in general, again, this also doesn't address the injuries in the room. What with Farouk being most likely out for the rest of the year. Idealistically, they said 6 to 8 weeks with his broken foot, but even then, that's just idealistically. Does he want to be in the game at this point, and will he return looking like he was prior to his injury? Only time will tell. This also goes into injuries on the O line, such as Hickman and Jake Taylor, which kind of affected how the O line played, and you had to shuffle guys around who may not be nearly as familiar with that position that they were put in versus what they know. As well as several wide receivers being out, like Anderson, for example, or Andrel being out, and then Nick Anderson just trying to get back into the groove of everything as well. Combined with the lack of explosive plays to get the crowd pumped, as well as the lackluster Toby Keith third to fourth quarter sing along, which we will address in another video, it was kind of a disappointing showing for the first game of this season. But again, as I have stressed before, we cannot freak out. There's too many variables that have to be taken into account. We can only have valid criticism for the stuff that we have control over, such as the lackluster O line play as a result of how many starters were out. So that all said, uh, I'm just going to be honest. Based on how the field looked, I'm starting to get kind of 2015 Oklahoma Sooners vibes that we had against that we started off with, which cleaned itself up by surprisingly Tennessee. Again, ironic that this year it took to Tennessee to get to that next, or then it took to Tennessee to get to that next step. And guess what? Guess who we need to have to be uh, a well-oiled machine by? Tennessee. Will that happen again? Well, we're going to find out in a couple of weeks at this point. Defense is going to dictate the path of this season, and we're probably going to win ugly at times. And again, don't get me wrong, this was nowhere near the meltdown that we had at levels of our victory over Army or Oklahoma State a couple years back. I'll take an ugly W over loss every day of the week, but that still does not free them from any type of criticism. Again, though, I'm rambling at this point because a lot of this has already been covered. There's only so much you can delve on with Temple before it just becomes monotonous and you're just repeating the same information over and over. That said, that's the wrap up with Temple. This week, we've got Houston for our mandatory retroactive Power 4 opponent, who I kind of expect to do just as much as Temple did. Not very much. That said, we'll see you next year in Philly Temple, and we'll see everybody on our preview video against Houston. Boomer Sooner, there's only one.